silently, which is very thoughtful to do it silently. I appreciate it. All right, so many of you did the little survey thing. I was going to see if I could find the results of that and show them. I should be able to find it, right? Oh. As much as I've Zoomed, every time I try to do something with Zoom that it won't allow, it surprises me. There we go. Trying to move the little square so I can find the document, survey thing. You guys ever use this Google Drive? I am, not very good with technology. Did I really need to tell you that? And I opened my Google Drive yesterday to check the survey responses, and I saw that somebody had shared a document, none of you, of course, but somebody had shared a document that I had written 3 years ago, and they were editing it. And I thought, that's just the weirdest thing. It's a company that I work with for soccer. So I emailed them and said, what are you guys doing? And they said, oh, Dropbox is better. I don't, I don't even need to share with you that I'm not good with technology. You witness this every day. So, all right. So I asked him why you were using that old document. And it's like, I don't know, it's not me anymore. So he had transferred his files to someone else, and someone that I've never met is editing some document I made. But oh well. All right. It didn't look like they were doing anything nefarious. The Russians and Iranians, it's the Iranians that are doing weird stuff now. Dang. I thought I had just opened that so I could share it with you. Oh, crap. It went away, though. Okay. Oh, poo-poo. Okay, I'm going to try one more time. We'll see how it goes. It is open. Oh, dang it. Okay. One more try. Poop. Oh, there it is. Okay. All right. Can you, I'm assuming you can see my thing. It's anonymous, so I don't think it's bad to show you the stuff. So I'm probably doing better than either Joe Biden or Donald Trump will do in the election. However, I don't know if that's our standard. So most of you prefer more questions than fewer, although it's 60-40-ish split, a little closer to 65-35. And most of you thought the questions were about right. The grades were, average was a little lower. Some of you had more trouble, some of you had less. So I know you probably wouldn't share this opinion, but I kind of thought the first quiz was too easy. I didn't want to make the next one like substantially harder. And then you're a little more split on the review. So I'll see if I can be a little more specific, but again, college, so I don't want to tell you all the answers ahead of time. So, and still kind of figuring out how to do this in a reasonable and fair way. So, yay for COVID and quarantine and that sort of thing. All right. So that's kind of where we are survey-wise. And then today we wanted to finish. Did I just put the survey back up? Oh, crud. Okay. Today we want to finish what we were working on. Your little pictures are moving around on my screen. All right. So crud, can I say crud? I think I need to open the notes. I think they're not open, so let me open those. Then we will get started. I don't even see the notes. Do we even have notes? Yeah, we have notes. Okay. All right. I'm getting ready. I'm so glad I'm recording this too. It's like, do we have any record of our teachers struggling with technology? Yes, we do. We have a video of it. So, I don't know if it's better to have all the nice younger teachers who don't struggle as much. All right. Oh, you're back. There you are. That's good. Okay. All right, lecture notes. And then our weekly question was the World War II sometimes called the Good War? Is this accurate? Why or why not? That sort of thing. So we'll talk about that before we go. Um, I think my thought was that we would briefly go over some of the battles, not so super much, but it'll give you an idea. I haven't written the questions yet. I'm sorry, but I'm thinking that's kind of a tomorrow morning thing, and then I'll make the review right after. So, um, uh, as far as battles go, I might put one or two on there because it is World War II. I hate to not recognize any battles at all. Um, all of these are important. They are. I'll tell you that if I'm putting some on the test, D-Day, I mean, because of U.S. involvement and the United States gets to help plan it, D-Day would probably be the Pacific, or excuse me, the Atlantic one. And then I just assume you know Pearl Harbor. I don't know if I'm right, but I assume you know about that. And, there's going to be some discussion of the atomic bombs in some way on the quiz, and certainly that should probably show up in your answer to the question, was this a good war? I would kind of guess of all of these, probably Battle of Midway is going to be like the big crucial one because it's kind of turning point. But I've known people who fought in some of these because I'm old, so I have old grandparents, deceased of course, who fought in World War II. So I had a grandfather who fought at Oh, he served with Patton. I think he was, I'm sure he was at the Battle of the Bulge, but he ran the part of the supply lines for Patton, which he was a truck driver and drove the trucks that hauled explosives, which is when he came back to the United States, drove dynamite hauling trucks. I grew up in a mining area, so clearly not Central Texas. I don't think we do mining here. Anyway, back to this. Okay, so Battle of the Atlantic's kind of the general description of the battle to control the shipping lanes between the United States and Western Europe. And eventually the Allies win this in large part because we can make ships faster than the Germans can sink them. And sonar, that helps as well. So technology helps us detect the submarines, and then we're able to blow up the submarines. Yeah. Battle of Stalingrad this is of course after the Germans have broken their non-aggression pact with Soviet Union and taken over parts of the Soviet Union, and this is as far east as the German military gets in the Soviet Union, and then the Soviets start to push back. And Stalin's position on people who surrendered is that they're traitors. So as the Soviet forces are pushing back, they're imprisoning some people who survived the Nazi onslaught because they should have fought to the death. So it's kind of, yeah. Stalin's not exactly a great guy. We'll talk a little bit more about him when we start talking about the next chapter, but it's funny. I saw, maybe it's not funny, but old people in Facebook. So one of my friends posted, one of my more liberal friends. I'm kind of in the middle of all my friends, super conservative, super liberal. I kind of hang out in the middle. But one of them posted something about the big three, how in World War II they had the big three who were very noble leaders. And then now we have, and they put pictures of Putin, Boris Johnson, and Donald Trump. And I kind of got the point, except it's not like Stalin was a great, noble guy. And I kind of wanted to post that. And then I remember people don't really post on Facebook to reflect historical accuracy. Operation Torch opens a second front in Northern Africa. This is also around the time when the U.S. puts Patton in Northern Africa. We hadn't had great success there with other forces, and Patton's kind of a fight till you die, nobody sleeps till the battle's over kind of guy. So And he's rough, but his men really respected him because, he's rough with them, but he's also rough with himself. So I think he's one of those guys that I don't know that I want to say practices what he preaches, but if you read a biography of Patton, I think you'll be fascinated. He thinks he's a reincarnation um, of all sorts. No, I'm not questioning Putin's intelligence because I don't want to get poisoned. No, Putin is, dang, okay, sorry, I was just reading the chat. Putin is rough. And Stalin, similarly rough. I think, they both got that kind of KGB thing going for them. So, wow. Um, nah, let's see. I'm sorry. I really did get distracted, didn't I? And oh gosh, sorry. So Operation Torch, Patton, that's who I was talking about. Patton, interesting fellow, thinks that he's a reincarnation of Alexander the Great. Several other people, one of the Caesars, probably Julius, wouldn't you think? I can't remember. And he had had people in his family fight in every conflict that the United States was involved in. And he reads poetry. He's a really weird kind of guy. Got a high squeaky voice and a small dog that people would make fun of behind his back, but not in front of him. And had great compassion for his soldiers unless he thought they were faking. And then he would slap them in the face in the hospital or pull a gun on them, which is what got him in a little bit of trouble. But there are books you could read about him, and he's one of those guys. Like, you don't want him as your dad. You probably don't want him as your next door neighbor, but he's probably the guy you do want in control of your army in most ways. In most ways, I mean, he's not a perfect guy, but intensely brilliant with battle strategy. But with interpersonal stuff, which is, it's problematic sometimes, even when you're in the military. I know our thought is always have to be rough and tumble in the military, and certainly you do in many ways, but being a jerk to the people you command is probably not always helpful. I've heard about basic training. Clearly, I haven't done it, but Patton, fascinating fellow. And some people will suggest that he was assassinated, kind of indirectly. He's forced off the road and has a car accident after he's demoted. They take away control of the first armored division from him after he says some pretty negative things about the Soviet Union while they were still technically our allies. So he ends up getting forced off the road while he's hunting, on a hunting expedition, and he has a car crash that leaves him paralyzed, and then he dies. So he's a fascinating fellow. Yes, Patton didn't really want you to disagree with him. That's going to be our understatement of the day. No kidding. No, you are right. No, and he is a fascinating guy. He is one of those guys that kind of does his homework, though. Part of the reason he's incredibly successful in Northern Africa is he's fighting against Erwin Rommel, who'd quite literally written the book on armored warfare, tank warfare. So Patton actually read the books that he wrote, and it gave him a very important strategic advantage. He really is the first Allied commander that has consistent success against the Afrika Korps, the tanks in Northern Africa, the German forces. So, and also, Patton was probably, they didn't really diagnose this stuff back then, but was probably dyslexic. So he definitely had trouble in school, but really persevered. He was as hard on himself as he was other folks, which I think is why his men liked him. There's also some famous story about the Battle of the Bulge where he plays a really crucial role. His forces really shore up the bulge, the part where the Allied forces were really struggling. And the Germans, it's kind of the Germans' last stand or the Germans' last offensive. But they had terrible weather. It's the middle of the winter. They couldn't get clearings to get the planes to get in and out and to launch the assaults they needed to. So Patton orders the chaplains in the military to write a prayer that the weather would clear and that they would have the ability to kill as many Germans as possible. I'm cleaning up what he called the Germans, of course. And they weren't exactly excited about writing that prayer, but he reminded them in his own patent sort of way that he was their commanding officer. So they did write the prayer, and then he had all of his troops assemble and read the prayer together out loud, and shortly thereafter the weather cleared. So his men said he even gives orders to God. But Patton, I think, is an incredibly fascinating guy, and probably, crucially important in a lot of ways in the war effort, and maybe was able to do things no one else could do. But we have several other generals, both, in our service and a couple of British generals as well, commanders, who you could say similar things about. I think Eisenhower, is crucial as well. And Eisenhower is the guy who arranges D-Day. And D-Day, the reason that I know that I will put that on the quiz is that's the beginning of the retaking of Western Europe. So this is the Allies, ouch, poop, putting, sorry, putting forces into Western Europe, into France, excuse me. So it's the Allied retaking of France, which clearly took a while. The Germans were entrenched there. They had made concrete bunkers. They had been in France for over 3 years at this point. So, and this is a multi-phased, multi-location account, amphibious retaking, and Eisenhower's got to coordinate generals from several different Allied countries, and he has to deal with these very large personalities. Also, Patton had just gotten in trouble. That's right after he'd done the thing where he went to the field hospital and slapped some of his men because he thought they were faking because they had battle fatigue, and he didn't think that was a real thing. Not a lot of people did. They called it being shell-shocked during that time period. But Patton, and he wasn't alone in that belief, didn't think that was a real issue. So he challenged his men by slapping them. One, apparently he pulled a gun on and said, stop being a baby, and cleaning that up, of course, as well, and get back to the front. So his punishment was he didn't get to participate in D-Day. He served as a decoy in another part of the English coast. But this was a very important, very challenging campaign to organize, and Eisenhower is particularly gifted at that sort of thing. Yeah. And most of it was very successful. Some of it was incredibly unsuccessful, but most of it, was successful. And the combined effort of D-Day was really the beginning of the end for the Allies, for the Axis powers, for the Germans and Italians in Western Europe. So, Battle of the Bulge, I think I kind of just mentioned. So this is Belgium-German border. And this is the Allies' attempt to actually push into Germany, which happens around Christmas of 44. And then VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, is May of 45. And I'm going to mention again, I know I've said it like 3 times, D-Day is going to be, I will put that on the quiz, I promise you. Promise. So make sure that you know when it is, who organized it, and why it mattered. So, D-Day. D-Day, yes. All right, Pacific Theater. This is pretty rough as well. The Japanese were really entrenched all over the Pacific, and the general strategy for the Allies in retaking the Pacific referred to as island hopping. So there are literally thousands of islands in the Pacific, and what the Allied strategy will be is to take the ones that seem to be of the most strategic importance. So they're not going to go from island to island because that would take forever and they wouldn't have enough men. Plus the Japanese are kind of in that mode. They're not kind of in that mode. It is their tradition to fight to the last man. So you don't give up. So what this means, it doesn't mean, I'm not suggesting that people in the US military give up, that sort of thing. But I mean, we have a long tradition of planned retreat. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean all the way back to George Washington, when it looked like he was going to lose more men than he could afford to lose. It's like, you know what? We'll go and we'll fight some other time. And if you have a limited number of forces, which you always do, to be fair, you know, this is not cowardly necessarily, even though it's certainly culturally seen that way at times. It certainly was for the British back in colonial days, and always for the Japanese up until the modern era, although some would argue still is that way. So really high casualty rates in the Pacific. I'm trying to read what somebody's. Yes, yeah, this is death by combat better than the shame of coming home alive in defeat. And no, absolutely, that's very much an Eastern philosophy. And it kind of goes back to the idea that the whole is more important than the one, which you see reflected culturally and spiritually as well in Eastern traditions. And I was trying to mention that Stalin also felt that way, but he felt that way more about his troops. He surely didn't feel that way about himself. So I know he had served in the military. So. Stalin. Don't defend Stalin. I know you're not going to. Maybe you are. Oh, by the way, Coke Zero in the glass. I don't want you to think I broke out the wine or something. Isn't it too early for that? All right. Oh, crud. Although my shoulder hurts now, I probably should. Okay. So in here, the reason Battle of Coral Sea protects Australia and New Zealand from Japanese advance. I didn't mean to skip over the Philippines, but the Japanese take over the Philippines in 42 in large part because we just say, you know what, we're not going to be able to defend the Philippines, so we're out. So we leave and we take MacArthur with us. So they end up taking they leave some of the enlisted men, they certainly leave the contractors, and of course they leave the Filipinos there, all of whom get captured by the Japanese military and then go on the Bataan Death March. Now, if you want to read about something horrific, and for some reason some of you will, you could read a book about the Bataan Death March. I used to have one in my class, and the kids were so fascinated by how gruesome the photos were that book got stolen all the time. And I think it was just called Prisoner of War, but I can't remember. But it wouldn't matter which book you read. Most of those are written by people who survived it, which is a very small percentage. It's about 25%. It's as brutal a thing as you're ever going to read about. It is some nasty stuff, no doubt. Battle of the Coral Sea protects New Zealand and Australia and kind of stops the Japanese advance. And then the Battle of Midway is the first legitimate defeat for the modern Japanese Navy. Now, it's at a high cost, as all of these battles are. Japan loses 4 aircraft carriers while the US loses 3. And then what you start to see in the smaller islands, more of the official island hopping, is really high casualty numbers, especially for the Japanese, where they do fight to the death. And if you look at prisoner of war numbers, sometimes they're in the single digits because, again, tradition. My father-in-law always told me, I know he won't watch this, so I'm going to say this. He always told me that he fought at the Battle of Okinawa, which I'm not sure that he did, just from his stories about it. And he let me look at his service records one time. It's like, yeah, I don't think you were in the military quite long enough or quite at the right time to be there. But this was incredibly brutal, as was Iwo Jima. And Iwo Jima's has that iconic flag raising photo, or reconstructed photo, I think is probably the best way to look at that. But Iwo Jima and Okinawa are rough. And these are those heavy, heavy casualty numbers with people doing the kamikaze pilots. They know they're not going to win, that they're going to die, so they're going to take as many people with them as they can. Iwo Jima is a cavernous island, so you take the upper level, but then you have 3 levels of caves beneath that. So then the U.S. Allied forces. They're primarily US, but there's some British and Australians there as well. I don't mean to leave them out. Sorry, very much a US-centered discussion of this today, isn't it? But the Allied forces have to clear all of the levels of caves, and nobody gives up. And I think this is where you see the stories of the newspaper reporters aren't very many with this with this effort, but usually there's at least an embedded reporter or two. But they describe the Japanese soldiers tying themselves into trees so that if they get shot, they don't fall out, and tying their weapons to their hands so that if they get shot, they don't drop their gun. And also, apparently, there's a plan that when you die, your body tenses up, and it essentially would allow you to fire your weapon after you're dead. This is what I've read. I have no idea if that's true. I'm sorry, I'm just sharing that with you. But the reason that they wrote about it was to show the Japanese commitment to fighting to the death and maybe even a little beyond. So casualty numbers, anything you read about any of these battles in the Pacific is going to be gruesome, really gruesome. I guess I shouldn't doubt my father-in-law so much, should I? Because it may be that he just didn't want to tell how gruesome stories were. Although, I don't know. Okay. But he did serve nobly after that, whether he was in Okinawa or not. And then atomic bomb, we'll definitely talk about that, because that's one of, yeah, I mean, I don't know how you teach about World War II and not talk about this. Now, I will suggest to you that the type of discussion we have about atomic weapons in the modern era is not the same type of discussion that they would have had. There's a race to build the atomic weapons, and whoever gets there first, it's really kind of understood that they're going to use them. And so Japan's involved in this, the Soviet Union, England, United States, and whoever else I left out, Germany. So whoever gets there first is going to use it. And I know typically when I taught high school, the high school kids' sentiment, and I get it, I'm sure I felt the same way in high school, like, how cruel was this? How heinous were we to use this on innocent people? And it's like, yeah, yeah. And then my position with them sometimes would be, and it's not that I didn't empathize or sympathize, I guess sympathize is a better word, with their position. It's like, would you have preferred that the Germans got it first or that the Soviets got it first? And it's like, historically, yeah, this is ugly, no doubt. And what's interesting to me in some ways is the Japanese response to it, which, it is unconditional surrender. And then later on, their leaders saying, I can't believe you didn't just completely decimate our country or take it over and make it part of your empire, because that's what we would have done to you, which is accurate, I'm sure. So it's weird to think about the United States using the atomic bomb in maybe a more measured way than our opponents might have. But that it's probably true. And anyway, I'm going to say this is going to just sound wrong. So I hope you kind of get what I'm trying to say, even though I'm not saying it in a very artful way. All right, so Hiroshima and Nagasaki, significant first use of an atomic bomb in war. And not that there have been officially other uses of it, but certainly people will threaten, by people, I mean, the United States and the Soviet Union in this era. And then, of course, in the modern era, anybody who has it or is close to it that hates somebody else that has it or is close to it. So we're talking Middle East and Pakistan and India. They don't like each other. Have you noticed that? You see what you're chatting about. Yes, I'm not going to disagree with you there about some political and military leaders keeping other U.S. political and military leaders from using atomic weapons. Yeah, MacArthur definitely wanted to nuke anyone that kind of got in his way. you'll see him most famously get fired for wanting to nuke North Korea, yeah, during the Korean conflict, when we, of course, had troops right on the border. So that might not have gone well. And there'll be other people, oh goodness, why can't I think of the name? It's Goldwater, who suggests that we should use nuclear weapons in Vietnam. It's the guy who runs for president against LBJ. I think it's Goldwater. Yeah, because Roosevelt gives not Roosevelt, Reagan gives the nominating speech. Yeah, and the scientists, they will start a program called Atoms for Peace. And their recommendation is that you just share atomic technology with everyone so that everybody has it. And then they kind of move away to what you're talking about as well, to maybe not wanting everybody to have it, but wanting more reasonable people to have the technology to kind of keep other people in check. Yeah. Now, it sounds like you guys are pretty well schooled in this stuff, so glad to hear that. Good job. All right, enough about battles, maybe. All right, so what's going on in the United States during World War II? Well, everybody's got a job, so unemployment's over, the economy changes, 50 million men register for the draft, and this is a requirement, but you don't see a lot of people resisting the draft, not even as many as you saw in World War I, which was a pretty negligible number, although I know Red Scare and we're going to deport some of them, so they didn't feel negligible. I don't mean it in that way, but statistically was small. Lots of people end up serving, over 10 million Americans, people from the United States serve in the military. War Production Board kind of throws out the idea that the government shouldn't participate in the economy. So they really direct the the domestic economy. So the government tells industry what to build. And industry is fine with this because the government's buying everything they produce. So this is seen as a coordinated war effort that's necessary and not unconstitutional. So consumer goods are going to be rationed. If you have super old relatives, and they'd have to be old, they'd have to be in their 90s, they might talk about their ration books. There were certain things you couldn't buy unless you had ration coupons or stamps, essentially. And then those things were like sugar, chocolate. I would have been in trouble without the chocolate. But the important stuff, gasoline, so fuel and tires and things like that were very, very limited. Also, certain types of fabric that were used to make uniforms, which is how you get to Zoot Suit riots, which we might get to today, probably will. And you can read a book about that too. That's kind of interesting stuff. War Production Board coordinated industry in the war effort. Consumer goods were heavily rationed. Companies made, oh, that is no lie. Companies are going to make a ridiculous amount of money, which they may or may not share with their employees. They probably share it more than you would expect because you're cynical about corporations, as you should be, but they did keep a lot of the profits as well. What you'll see after this era is that US consumers have an enormous amount of spending money because they've worked full-time and beyond during, if they didn't get drafted, and there's nothing for them to buy. There really isn't. Consumer goods are either not being produced or they're rationed. So they've essentially saved money, which is not a very American thing, but they've saved money because there's nothing to buy for nearly a decade. So after the war effort is over, we're going to go on a massive spending spree in the 50s and early 60s, which is going to create really probably the best economy we've ever had, because you'll see the economic growth in all sectors of the economy, and the gap between wealthy and poor gets as small as it's ever been. So that's an unusual thing. Yeah, we don't do that so much anymore. Or before, yeah. All right, companies make large profits, and because people are making money, more people are paying income tax, which helps us to pay for stuff like the war effort, although we will have some war debt, but not that we don't pay it off. Yeah, we will. People are going to move to the West Coast because the Pacific Theater, production for the Pacific Theater is a big deal as well. Plus, you already have those folks relocating because of the Dust Bowl. So, and the Southern economy is going to experience a lot of growth because you'll see a lot of defense industries in the South because the weather's better and the sun's out more often, so they can do stuff that they need to produce stuff or test things outside. The South is a better place to do that. And labor unions, as a rule, will take a no strike policy or pledge because it would be unpatriotic to strike in the middle of work. You'll see a few exceptions to that, notably, oh goodness, it's the union that was started by the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. It's an African American union. And this group of folks is going to consider striking because they're not being paid the same as white workers. You're not going to be mad at them, I don't think. People did maybe thought they were a little unpatriotic, but I think you in the modern era go like, nope, if you're not getting paid the same and you're doing the same work, why wouldn't you go on strike? I think you, as a rule, would be more supportive. And they really just threatened the strike. It was headed by a guy named Asa Philip Randolph, and FDR ends up negotiating with him so that they don't go on strike and paying African American workers the same. So it had the desired effect without an actual strike. And again, I think in the modern era, we just look at that and go like, no, that's what they should have done. It was probably briefly seen as unpatriotic. Okay, maybe more than briefly. Free enterprise was considered by many to be the fifth freedom, and your book talks about that as well. So people in this era didn't see soaring corporate profits as a big problem. Now, it is interesting because at a certain point, they will ask their workers to freeze wages and to be patriotic, not to demand too much of the government because the government's going in debt because of the war effort, which is true. But the corporate profits were enormous, and that wasn't very much emphasized. So it's, maybe another example of corporations getting a slightly better deal than the average person. That might be my understanding. Okay. Office of War Information, will produce posters and propaganda at first. Some people will complain that it's really more supporting the FDR administration at first, but then after a while, people just go like, nope, it's a good thing. So that's where we get Rosie the Riveter. And I'm always fascinated that feminist groups will use the Rosie the Riveter poster. So like, yeah, we can do it, that sort of thing. We're equal to men. Part of what's going on in the Rosie the Riveter poster, maybe, should I find that? Have you seen that? You guys have seen that? Let me see if I can find it really quick somewhere. Oh, goodness. Oh, it said I stopped the screen sharing. I'm sorry. Well, I meant to, didn't I, to find the Rosie the Riveter. Okay. I just assume you've seen this poster before. Okay. Let me go back to class. Class, are you still there? I know you're still there. I just can't find you on my screen. Okay, there you are. Sorry, goodness. So yeah, I know I'm trying to get the poster up there, but same problem as always. Turn is bad with technology. So there we go. So Rosie the Riveter in all her different forms with grandma. I remember reading that story. Some guy tried to rob this woman. She's 97. And then she punched the robber and ended up pinning him. That's a great story. But anyway, Rosie the Riveter, the point of Rosie the Riveter, we culturally, United States, had just spent a couple of decades telling women that if they worked, they would be ugly and infertile and men wouldn't want them. That's what we were telling them. So now when we've drafted 10 million men and we need 10 million women to go to work, we got to tell them we were just kidding about you being ugly and infertile and men not wanting you. So Rosie's not ugly. Have you noticed that? That's part of what's behind this poster, is that Rosie is not ugly. So if Rosie goes to work and she's still attractive, you will still be attractive to men if you have to enter the workforce. So to me, it's not the whole purpose of the poster, but it's a large part of the purpose. So I'm always fascinated that feminists use that, to show how strong women are, which of course I think women are strong. I say sexist stuff in here all the time, which I'm mostly kidding around about. But it might have been a little sexist depiction of Rosie to make sure that women didn't feel bad about entering the workforce. All right, back to the notes. Maybe we'll see how I do. I know I clicked share the screen. There we go. Okay. All right. Oh, sorry. So women take men's jobs in labor industries. There'll be some who serve as women Air Force service pilots, WASP, and WAVES. There'll be WAVES as well. And I think the other group is called WACS, WACS. But there are women who serve in the military during this time period. Some are pilots. Typically, they serve in medical positions, but not always true. Almost always officially non-combat, but if you're in a war, whether you're in a combat or non-combat position, there are times you're getting shot at and might have the opportunity to shoot back. So there's not an expectation that women will permanently remain in the workforce or the military, but that this is an emergency situation. But our emergency situation ends up lasting a long time. So we're involved in the war from 41 till the end in 45. And then we very quickly go to the Korean conflict, which lasts another 3 years. And of course, we've got Japanese occupation for a very long time. And then we've got the after effects of the Cold War. So our military involvement is going to be very large for a long time. So some societal changes do result, even though they're not intended. Federal government begins to plan for the post-war world pretty quickly, because the assumption is once the tide starts to turn, so we're talking really late 42, early 43, that the US will be on the winning side, that the Allies will win. And then you start to see some discussion of how one of the best side effects of this will be is that the US will get to spread their culture, or our culture, excuse me, I do live here, and our economic system and our political system throughout the world. And perhaps we could guarantee full employment, and poverty, make sure everybody buys all kinds of stuff they don't really need, the way that we do in the United States. And then there'll also be a discussion of free college, medical care, low-cost mortgages, that sort of thing, at least for people in the United States. As you know, or maybe you don't know, I don't know, we don't really extend all of those things to everybody, but the thought is we could start to implement some of those programs for veterans. So you do see the GI Bill of Rights reflecting some of this, which is why college tuition should be free or almost free if you serve in the military, and you should have an opportunity to get a home loan at a low cost. Now, I don't know if that makes up for your low wages, but the other thing as well, medical care should be provided as well. And at times, really good medical care, at times not so good. So yeah, that's going to be an issue later. Issues of race, always issues of race in the United States, but honestly, pretty much everywhere in the world too. The big things you see in the United States are the Zoot Suit riots in 43. So what goes on here, kind of the quick version. Soldiers going on shore leave in Los Angeles. Bunch of Mexican American kids wearing Zoot suits. I should show you a picture of a Zoot suit, didn't I? Oh, and I forgot I was going to show you that video today too about the internment. Serna, you are really not on top of things today. Okay, so let me find the Zoot Suit pictures for you. All right. Goodness. All right. Yeah, I don't think we wear Zoot Suits. Well, I know I don't. I don't know if you do. Um, so let's click here. Maybe you can see some. Oh, this looks like we're buying some. But they're the larger suits. This is probably a good picture. Oh, no. Now we have to donate to Wikipedia as well. Should I do that? All right, it says these are modern Zoot Suits, but they're the big coats, they're long, they did typically have the chain, which is chained to your wallet, baggy pants, hat that matches, and a lot of these were really bright colors. In the era of the Zoot Suit riots, they also were made of wool. This amount of fabric was too much fabric to be legal during that era, so it violated ration codes. So when the soldiers saw them, they were incensed, maybe that's what it was. They were incensed, so they attacked the young men who were wearing the Zoot Suits. Now, these were trendy, as you might imagine, and you would wear these to dance clubs. So these are, older teens, younger 20-ish dudes that were going out partying, that kind of stuff. And they most likely had gone over the border to Mexico to buy the Zoot Suits, where they were probably less expensive, but definitely not illegal. There weren't ration codes in Mexico. So, they hadn't really done anything wrong. When the police are called in, rather than arresting the soldiers for beating up kids wearing the Zoot Suits, they arrested the guys in Zoot Suits. So people thought that was racist. There are probably some good reasons they thought that was racist, because, yeah, it probably was. That's why they thought that. Okay. Are you seeing the notes again? I'm sorry okay, thank you. I appreciate it. All right. And there's tons written about this in the modern era. This would be something that they really didn't talk about much when I was a kid, but again, I'm old, so we didn't talk as much about things the United States did wrong when I was a kid. And I can remember, for some reason, my sister-in-law giving me a dancing cat that sang a song called Zoot Suit Riots one year for Christmas, which has absolutely nothing to do with this, but there's apparently a song about this as well. Internment camps, and I'll show you the video here in a minute, and you go like, no, I don't want to watch a video. I don't know, crud, will the video work? We'll try it, and you can let me know. We decide pretty quickly, we, United States, by executive order, so the president says, like, this is what we're going to do. The Japanese Americans cannot be trusted after Pearl Harbor. So there's a very good chance that if the Japanese invaded the West Coast, that Japanese Americans would side with Japan. So we couldn't trust Japanese Americans, so we had to move them away from the coast. And a very large percentage of Japanese Americans and Japanese immigrants lived on the West Coast because, I don't know, geography maybe. And they worked as in fishing industries, farming industries, that sort of thing as a rule. And the government took them away from their homes and then put them into prison camps in the desert. And they said it was to protect them and also to protect other people from them. And the government would take care of their property or allow them to sell it. Most people lost about 80% of their net worth in this process, along with all of their constitutional freedoms. The response of the Japanese Americans was not violent at all, a couple of lawsuits. And then there was a group of soldiers, the Nisei soldiers, 442nd Regiment, who volunteered out of the camps to prove their loyalty to the country that just stripped them of all of their rights and property, which I think is one of the most astonishingly patriotic things that you'll ever read about. One of them. There are lots of astonishingly patriotic things that happened during this time period. some wild stuff. And then your book does an excellent job of talking about the civil rights movement, the beginning Fair Employment Practices Commission, which I mentioned a little, with the workers' strike of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters and unions led by A. Philip Randolph. So a push to force the federal government to pay war industry workers the same regardless of race, and then a very open discussion of how we are sending people of color from the United States overseas to end racism in Germany and other places. So perhaps it's time that we also start doing that in the United States, which is a huge part of why this era is really foundational for the civil rights movement. Huge part, I think. All right, let's see if this works. Now, I don't know if I really want to show you the video during class. We'll see. Because I don't know how the noise works and stuff, the noise. Did I just say that? How the noise works? The sound. So, let me share this for like 30 seconds. Let me try. And then you tell me, I'll stop, and then you tell me if you can hear stuff. Okay. Okay, I know it looks like the Star Wars screen. Could you hear the music?
No, cannot hear the music.
Okay, all right. Then I think what I'll do, I'll tell you what the video does. The video is 9 minutes long. I don't know if you can see that. It's 9 minutes and 20 seconds, and it's got that little Star Wars scrolling intro, which is very common for the time period. And I typically, let me stop sharing, sorry. I typically will give a really small extra credit assignment related to either that video or some other propaganda, which I'll post. I'll post that tonight. And you can have a couple weeks to do it. It's not super urgent that you get it done. But that video is from the US government. It's narrated by Milton Eisenhower, who is Dwight Eisenhower's brother. And he's essentially the head of what we would think of as Homeland Security in the modern era. And the purpose of the video is to explain why it was essential for the United States to imprison Japanese Americans, why we couldn't necessarily trust them, why maybe it was for their own good, and how they really didn't mind that we were doing it, which is pretty fascinating. So it's a government propaganda video. And if you're wondering, like, where would you have seen it? They would show these at the beginning of movies. So you would go to the movie theater, which people went to even during the Depression in the 30s, and then of course in the 40s as well, because you need something to take your mind off how crappy the world is. So millions and more people went to movies then than do now, of course. They didn't have as many options for entertainment, I understand that. But instead of whatever they show before movies in the modern era, which no one knows anymore because we don't go, but commercials or go buy some popcorn or turn off your cell phone or trivia or previews or whatever, they would show news during that time period because you heard the news on the radio, but you didn't get to see the news. So this was an opportunity for you to see the news. And so they would show these newsreels, and this would have been shown with the newsreels. So it was going to be presented as news. It's essentially propaganda. And propaganda typically has an element of truth in it that tends to ignore some other facts that are fairly relevant. So it's a very one-sided presentation of a situation or a very skewed and dishonest presentation of a situation. And my guess is you'll see both of those things, that it's one-sided and potentially dishonest as well. So, but moderately interesting, I think, maybe. All right, so your weekly question. So I'll post that later and you can watch it. I think when you see it, it'll make sense and you'll hear it, and it's not it's not confusing, I don't think. I think it's pretty straightforward. Um, your weekly question, let me put that up. Let me find it first. Oh, we still have time. That's good. I was afraid I'd gone too long. Some of you are going like, yes, you have. Don't be like that. Don't be like that. Maybe I have. All right, weekly question. Am I sharing? Yes, it says I am. Okay, thank you. World War II is often referred to as the Good War. Evaluate that title for the war. Is it appropriate? Why or why not? So I know you're not going to have too much trouble evaluating the good stuff about World War II. I mean, Hitler's heinous. There's just no way around, and there shouldn't be any way around it. And if this is an international conflict that if we had stayed out of, it would have gone on for several more years. Undoubtedly, I'm not saying that we saved the day. Although, you know, we were an important part of the Allied effort. But what is so important about our effort is that we're the ally that's not getting bombed. So we're the ally that's able to make stuff. Plus, we also have that amazing industrial capacity, and our military is pretty impressive as well. So we're able to develop things without getting bombed, and we have a great military, and we come in after everybody else has been fighting for a couple of years. So it's kind of a insurgents. Insurgents is not the right word. Injection of new troops, that sort of thing. It sparks some, we go in at a good time. I mean, if we'd been in earlier, you could also argue that it wouldn't have been as bad. So I'm not suggesting, I don't even know what I'm suggesting. So let me just go back to trying to say the military is really good. Our production capacity is important. It sparks the end of the Great Depression, in addition to helping to defeat fascism in Hitler. And, you know, Hitler and Mussolini in Japan, they're all rough. Lots of people get involved in things they didn't get to be involved in before, for better or worse. You've got lots of people being drafted, but it gives them an opportunity to see things they would have never seen before, to see desegregated or unsegregated life in Western Europe, to be treated differently overseas than they're treated in the United States, to push at a time period where they're going to be listened to for equal pay, and to create some situations which will lead to desegregation of the military. But there are also some pretty ugly things that go on. Certainly, you can read all kinds of stories of soldiers who are harassed during basic training, excuse me, not by their drill instructors, but because of their race or ethnicity. I know my father-in-law liked to tell stories about that, which I know were accurate. You will read about the Japanese internment, or you'll get to watch that video. There's not anybody that's going to argue now that that was appropriate or effective. Certainly people supported it then because, as the Supreme Court would say, race prejudice and war hysteria, that's a tough combo for sure. And the use of nuclear weapons, you know, whether you see that as moral or immoral or amoral. So I think that this discussion can go way beyond Hitler was bad, it was good that we defeated him. Now, for you to get all the points you want, which, you know, is 10, for you to get the points you want in this, I'm going to want to see some specific examples of something. So don't just say Hitler was bad, we defeated him. You know, if we'd gotten in earlier, we could have ended the Holocaust earlier. All those things are true, but I'm looking for events, for names, for policies. So something that shows me not only do you have the general idea, but you looked in your book, you learned something you didn't know before. I think part of what I always want from you is some evidence that you learned something you didn't know before. Because otherwise, you know, what's the point? What's the point? We should always be learning stuff, right? I know I am. Clearly not enough about technology, right? Okay, so almost time to go. So think of some questions, and I'm going to double check on the roll and see if people I didn't think were here are now here. So I didn't see Amelia Duran and some Christophers. Christopher Fresh, Christopher Gatewood, Alex Harmon. I'm looking. And it seems like there's one or two other people on the other page. Troy Yu. Let me scroll down. And Kara Matula. And again, my theory is always he doesn't come because I can't say his name. It's probably not why. All right, before we go, do you guys have any questions? Is there anything you want to ask? And I'll post the link and the assignment extra credit version for the Japanese internment. Now, I don't think I want to do, I hope you can live with this, I don't think I want to do the same time all your other stuff is due, probably the week before. And the video is 9 minutes and the assignment will just be to discuss accuracies and inaccuracies of propaganda that you see related to World War II. My assumption will be that you use the video. You don't have to, but that'll be my assumption. And I'll be completely fine with that if that's all you use. That'll be my expectation. All right, I feel like I'm done. Do you guys have any questions and or comments before we leave? And if you were here and I just said your name because I didn't think you were here, you should let me know. You know what I'm saying. All right, questions, comments. We still have 5 minutes. We could talk. Maybe 10 officially, I don't know. All right. You guys have questions, stay behind and ask them. Otherwise, feel free to go. Get a head start getting ready for your next class. Start early on lunch. Go see what your kids are doing while you weren't looking at them for an hour. Oh my gosh, the kids. You just never know. Get back to work. Have a good day. Okay. Question about the book review. That sounds good. So either type it in or say it out loud, whatever makes you happy.
So I looked at the list of books in the syllabus and none of them were of significant interest to me.
No, it's fine.
I was
30th when it's due, by the way. Sorry. Keep going, please. I apologize.
it said that the book should be scholarly, but I'm not 100% sure it's gonna fall under that. And I don't know if you heard of it, but James Baldwin has. It's
definitely heard of James Baldwin. I'm sorry. Keep going. Yeah, he's big.
A particular book. It's a small collection of his essays, and it's nonfiction. It's called No Name in the Street, and it's pretty much his perspective on some of the major events at
Nope.
the time.
That is absolutely fine. No, that is incredibly scholarly. Nope. Baldwin's a big dude. Yeah, he's hugely important. So please read away. Absolutely. Yep. Perfect. The due date is November 30th. Should be on the syllabus as well if you forget, but, and I'll start talking about that more next week. But no, Bree, that's a perfect book. Yeah, that'll be great. And you'll like it. You'll really like it, so. Oh, if I said October, I'm sorry. Yeah, November. Yeah, you should read a lot of Baldwin. No, that's very wise, very wise. Yeah. No, that gives you such great perspective on that era from it's just crucial. Yeah. No, you're wise to do that. All right. So sorry if I said it was due in October. Yeah, I don't want to scare you. November after Thanksgiving. So you have time. All right. Let's see. Thank you. You have a good day as well. The rest of you, sorry for scaring you. November 30th for book review. Sorry. Oh, I'm still recording.